Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we had Microsoft Build, which is Microsoft's big developer dev conference. And there's a big book of news, which we'll link in the show notes. But I went through and picked out some of the security things and privacy things that I thought would be interesting to our listeners. And as a reminder for those who are joining us for the first time, and for our listeners, Adam and I do work for Microsoft. We don't work in the development organization. We are in our field sales for security. But Microsoft is not a sponsor for this show. So starting with the AI stuff, because obviously AI was huge this week, as it will be going forward, because Microsoft is doing a lot of investments in that area. But I thought one of the things that was announced that'd be interesting for our listeners is new features in the Microsoft Azure AI content safety. And that is Microsoft's commitment to advancing responsible AI practices and equipping Microsoft's customers with advanced safeguards to protect their AI applications. So some of the things that were announced, key enhancements will include the introduction of custom categories that will empower users to create custom filters for generative AI apps tailored to specific content filtering needs or responsible AI policies. And so you're providing a more precise, relevant content safety approach across the diverse platforms. The other thing is the launch of prompt shields, or groundedness detection, which is in preview, but in Microsoft's Azure OpenAI Service and AI Studio as content filters, they'll showcase Azure AI's dedication to fortifying safety for large language models. And these features will represent a pivotal development in migrating both indirect and jailbreak prompt injection attacks and detect when LLMs produce ungrounded or hallucinated materials. So I thought those were really cool. I think anyone who's in that space would appreciate some of these features that are coming out.
Absolutely. I think there's sometimes been a false perception that Microsoft was just spreading investment money around and hit blackjack in the investment on OpenAI and now found themselves in this AI space all of a sudden. And that frankly couldn't be further from the truth. Microsoft Research has invested in AI technologies for a very long time, literally going all the way back to spell check in Microsoft Word and grammar checking in Microsoft Word. Those are AI-like technologies too, maybe more simplistic compared to what we have today. But the point stands that those are not just simple replacement exercises. They're actually looking at the content and making recommendations appropriately. And one of the things Microsoft has done since 2018 has elaborated on a set of responsible AI principles. And as employees, Andy and I have been trained on these principles, and we bring them up all the time. And we talk about the different categories of responsible AI and how we're going to deliver those. And I even think back to one of the most beloved internal activities at Microsoft is something we call SBC, or the Standards of Business Conduct. It's annual training on different things to be aware of. And the very first season, again, 2018, the main character trains a model using customer data and gets in trouble for it because that's an inappropriate use of customer data. And it's one of those things that all 200,000 plus employees of this company have been trained against is we are going to do these things responsibly. We're going to do them ethically. Here are the standards and principles upon which we will build everything we create moving forward. So definitely something we thought about for a long time. And of course, our customers are now thinking about too, that as you deploy AI in your world, maybe on your website to talk to your customers, as just one example, you want it to be grounded in your data and to not make up policies or things that don't exist, products that don't exist that you don't create, as an example. And so these technologies help you do that, help eliminate some of the reasonable concerns folks have as they're moving into this brave new world. And just one example for our listeners, Air Canada had deployed a chatbot on their site, and I don't know what underlying technology this used. This was a couple of years ago and went through the court system. So I'm going to assume this was maybe not a modern technology, but a customer asked it a question and it came up with a policy that didn't actually exist. And so Air Canada tried to say, oh, well, that's not actually our policy. Our policy is posted over here. We're not going to honor what that said. And it went all the way through the court system in Canada. And ultimately, it was found for the plaintiff that Air Canada needed to honor anything that appeared on their site. If it's on the aircanada.com site, it should be honored as this is your policy. And so I think that finding, again, in the Canadian court system, but still you could see a reasonable similar outcome in the United States and around the world, leads all organizations to be really careful and conscientious about how they build these things. And Microsoft is offering technologies to help get you to that point of trust and consistent results from these systems. And this is a new muscle for everyone because these are non-deterministic models. 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. It's more probabilistic. It's non-deterministic. The output is different every time. And so that's a different challenge, especially for maybe security practitioners who are used to, hey, if that port is closed, it's closed in my firewall kind of thing. This is a new world to deal with, and we're all learning as we go.
There's also some announcements around Microsoft Copilot. So there's an introduction of some new Copilot capabilities for process automation. Organizations will soon be able to elevate employee self-service by empowering anyone to create a Copilot that provides a new level of information, context, and discoverability from knowledge in documents and files on SharePoint sites. These Copilots will help individuals find the files they need and can answer questions based on the contents of the SharePoint site. Easy to create in just a few clicks. Additional enhancements will be available in the Copilot Studio. I thought this was super interesting. It's an early access program right now with preview coming out later this year, but it empowers users to create their own Copilot, of course, still guarded within the Microsoft Copilot experience, but specifically around SharePoint to help them find files.
Great idea. Just incredible. I know on Windows Weekly, Paul Thurrott has frequently talked about how he'd like to see something like this brought to consumer OneDrive. He talks about how all of his writings over decades are stored in his OneDrive. Well, he switched to Google Drive, but that's another story. And he would like to be able to have Copilot reason over that. And so he could essentially search his decades of writing in natural language and basically query it and ask questions about it. This is that same idea before the enterprise. Hey, I have a SharePoint document library that contains a vast amount of internal institutional knowledge. And as a non-developer, or citizen developer, as we like to call them, sometimes I can just say, hey, I want a new Copilot. Here's a document library. Learn about what's in here, and then let me query against it in natural language. Unlocking that institutional knowledge that we have stored in these troves of data inside our organizations, I think is super powerful because it really is one of the biggest challenges to deal with is capturing that institutional knowledge and making it accessible.
Yeah, and of course, that data does stay within your organization, just like with any of your M365 data. So it's not going to get leaked. Essentially, you're creating that grounded database for your organization within that Copilot for that specific SharePoint site or whatever documents that you deem are going to be part of this Copilot. Microsoft is also introducing some more extensibility concepts for plugins and connectors to Copilot into a single construct called Copilot extensions. Copilot extensions will enhance Microsoft Copilot by enabling new actions and customized knowledge for grounding within Copilot. So just more enhancements. We're going to have this whole new thing called Copilot extensions specifically for Copilot, where you can tailor some of your systems and workflows for that.
Some of the examples shown here are really incredible. I'd encourage folks to watch the day one build keynote on this, because they showed some of these examples, and they're really, really fascinating. It gets you to kind of think big on what's possible with this. Again, when I can have something I can have more conversational interface with to learn about things or make changes or whatever, it's really powerful. And then I'll add one other thing too, kind of on the same note, talking about extending Copilot. The other thing I saw, Andy, that I thought was really interesting was this idea of Copilot for Teams, and not like Microsoft Teams, but like for a team, where we can be in a team chat or a team meeting and we can invite Copilot to the meeting, and it'll take notes during the meeting, and we can say, hey, take a note on this. Hey, remind Joe to follow up on that later. And it can remind everyone, hey, we're halfway through the meeting. Have we accomplished our objectives? What do we still need to touch on? There was really cool stuff there too. So as opposed to just being this assistant for one person, for you individually, it becomes almost like a part of your team to help all of the team function better. And that was really cool too.
Some improvements for security coming to Microsoft Edge for Business. We're enhancing its defense against data leaks and vulnerabilities with 2 new capabilities. Number 1, screenshot prevention. So data exfiltration in a browser is a huge concern for a lot of organizations. Edge for Business will support screenshot prevention policies across the Microsoft 365, Defender for Cloud Apps, Microsoft Intune Mobile Application Management, or MAM, and Microsoft Purview. The screenshot prevention policies will secure against data exfiltration by blocking the ability to take screenshots on pages labeled as sensitive or protected. Screenshot prevention will be generally available in the coming months. And then the other thing is your ability to stay up to date with browser versions. So managed browser instances are not up to date are at risk for exploitation. The Edge Management Service will enable IT admins to see which devices have Edge instances that are out of date and at risk. It will also provide mitigation controls, such as forcing a browser reset to install updates and enabling automatic browser updates, or enabling enhanced security mode for additional protections. The capabilities in preview in the coming weeks. And so both of these, I think, are phenomenal capabilities. I mean, out-of-date browsers, major concern because of zero-day attacks. And we've had some screenshot prevention capabilities in the past, but to be able to do it just within Edge, I think is amazing, because Edge is a solution that traverses multiple operating systems. In the past, we had something like called Windows Information Protection, and stuff that is sensitive won't be able to be shared within Teams and all of that, like screenshot for like Word documents. But now it's like just within Edge, which I think opens up the door for more areas to be protected in an organization.
It's an area where we at Microsoft have made a lot of investments over the years, is creating workflows where it can be solely browser based. So for security reasons, you may want to just design a user experience that is browser only. And maybe you allow it even from unmanaged devices, or maybe you only want to manage the applications on the device. This is something we've done on iOS and Android for years with mobile application management. And I believe MAM has now come to Windows as well, where you can take an unmanaged Windows PC, but manage just the Edge browser within it. And this capability is exposed through that. You mentioned mobile application management, which dovetails nicely with some of the similar capabilities on iOS and Android. And so customers always ask about this. It's some of the first words out of their mouth. So this has been a frequently request. And like you said, Andy, Edge is cross-platform. It's on macOS, iOS, Android, Windows, Linux. And so now across all those different operating systems, we can bring this capability to them. I think that's going to be of interest to very security sensitive organizations. As they always caution folks, though, keep in mind the ubiquity of the smartphone, and it's relatively straightforward to pull out the phone and take a picture. And modern phones now even have automatic OCR, built in. I mean, in an iPhone today, you can take a picture of anything with text and just copy and paste it. So this is a helpful mitigating control. It is not the end all be all. So just have an awareness of that. Ultimately, unless you prevent somebody from looking at it with their own eyes or pat them down before they go into a room, there's going to be ways to exfiltrate. So you can limit it, you can mitigate it, but you can't eliminate it. So something to keep in mind. The stay up to date features with the managed browser instances, really cool stuff. I'm not aware of if other browser vendors do something similar. I know Chrome has some sort of cloud delivered management capabilities, but being able to enforce updates, I agree, Andy, from a security perspective is incredibly powerful. We did a whole show on browser security many years ago now on the Blue Security podcast. And it is one of the key vectors of security risk on any endpoint because it's loading arbitrary, untrusted code all of the time. And there's always new vulnerabilities being found in browsers because they're complicated and they do a lot and they're ubiquitous and they get used all day, every day. On almost any system, the browser is the most used application. So we want to keep that application secure. It's really critical. And this helps security professionals and IT admins do just that. So very exciting.
And when it comes to updating browsers, I think, and you should test this in your own personal life and organization, but a lot of times they do need a reboot, a restart of the browser in order to finish the update.
Mm-hmm.
However, when it restarts through an update, I have found, I think the biggest concern is that you have 100 tabs open and you're going to lose your tabs. I have found that the majority of the time, whenever I update my browsers, the tabs just reopen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has a cache that remembers what you had, and it'll just reopen all of your tabs, no matter how many you have. So, I mean, like Adam said, this is a huge concern for security. It's definitely something that needs to be up to date. I cringe every time when someone shares their screen and they have a browser open and it has that red arrow that says update browser now.
Yep.
All right, so a bunch of new Windows security features. I'm just going to give a high-level overview for the majority of these, and I'm going to skip over some of them as well, but they're all available within the book of news, and you can dive into them. And there is one particular feature that I'm super interested in that I want to do a deep dive in on a later show. But here are a couple of things. Number one, virtualization-based security, or VBS. Key protection will now protect keys from admin-level attacks. Key protection is a real top priority for the majority of developers. And so in the new Windows security, this will protect the keys from even admin level attacks. Personal data encryption will enhance security by encrypting data and only decrypting it when users unlock their PCs by using Windows Hello for Business. NTLM less to strengthen user authentication. The reliability and flexibility of Kerberos has been expanded to reduce NTLM dependencies. These changes are exposed through the Negotiate protocol, and this update is generally available. Attestation, developers can remotely and securely verify or attest critical device health artifacts, credentials, and key materials within their apps. So when an app is integrated with the attestation service, it can verify device health and define custom actions. Today, the attestation service supports device health, TPM, and VBS key storage providers. Zero Trust DNS. This will enable domain level based lockdown of Windows devices for high security environments. So when ZTDNS, Zero Trust DNS, is enabled on a Windows device, all outbound IPv4 and IPv6 traffic from a device will be blocked unless it is approved by a trusted, protected DNS server or manual exception that has been configured by the IT administrator. This features in preview today, and super interested in that. There was a whole blog article on this. We're going to do a deeper dive on this feature because I honestly missed this until I went through it in the book of news, and I think this is super interesting. Microsoft in general has not been super aggressive in the last few years on network security, but that is changing very quickly with things like intra internet protection and intra private access and this new zero trust DNS. And so it's super interesting that we're diving into that whole network area. And we'll do a deeper dive on another show for that. Win32 app isolation will help contain damage and safeguard user privacy choices in the event of an app compromise. So it offers a security boundary and components that virtualize resources and provide brokered access to other resources. Using Win32 app isolation capabilities, app developers will be able to be guided to develop apps with least privilege resource access. So really cool stuff there. Making administrators more secure with user-approved elevation. App developers should use the principle of least privilege and elevate to use critical PC resources only when required for the best user experience. And then finally, trusted signing. Signing the app means when smart app control is enabled for users, apps will be seamlessly installed on Windows and regarded as high reputation. So a lot of cool things coming for Windows security. I think this is really good stuff here.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. And this kind of mirrors David Weston's blog too, which we're going to talk about one line item from that in a moment. Not a ton to add here. I look forward to unpacking the Zero Trust DNS more. We're going to unpack the NTLM a little bit more in just a second. So really kind of focused on the last couple of ones with the Win32 app isolation and user-approved elevation and trusted signing. To be honest, these are similar features to things that Apple has rolled out on Mac OS. And sometimes a great idea lends itself to other scenarios as well. And so I think this is acknowledging Apple's done a good job with some of these ideas. And so we want to bring some of them to Windows in its own way, of course. And again, Andy and I aren't involved in anything like this, but we're just kind of talking about it in our own personal lives. App isolation, sandboxing effectively or close to it would be huge because it's really been a challenge with the existing kind of Windows app model that we don't have that the apps can have a lot of interplay and intercommunication between them, and isolating them a little bit more would obviously be a huge security win. Similarly, not have apps do admin-y stuff all the time, but ask when they want to do something with admin privileges, huge step forward. And just signing apps in a trusted way, it doesn't mean you have to publish everything through the Microsoft Store. It just means you're kind of notarizing your app or signing your name to it effectively. And then we can look at it and know, okay, this is likely a high reputation, a trustworthy app, and we can trust it because we've built a lot of capabilities into Windows now, both in the built-in Windows Defender antivirus, as well as some other features that shipped in Windows 11 around app reputation, that when an app runs for the first time on a system, especially like an installer, there'll be a call out to the cloud to say, hey, should I run this? And if it hasn't been run on a lot of PCs or we haven't seen it before, we might say, you don't want to do that. But now in this case, if you sign your app, even in the early days of distribution, we'll go, yeah, that's a high reputation app. That developer went through the signing process. We know who they are and we trust them. That's a big step forward. That helps, I think, across the board because it makes those messages even more impactful when you get them because they happen even less frequently.
Another thing that was announced at Build that I think, for me, as a self-proclaimed geek, I was kind of excited about is this new category of PCs called Copilot Plus PCs. And along with that, Qualcomm had announced a new dev kit for Windows with a special edition system on a chip, their Snapdragon X Elite. And Windows on ARM has had a shaky history in the past. But, and I'll kick it over to Adam in a little bit because he's actually been using Windows on ARM for a little bit. But I think with this new, they call it an NPU, neural processing unit, that has, capabilities of delivering some pretty powerful computing power and battery life. I think that is the biggest crutch of most Windows computers is, especially laptops, how long you can last on an Intel type chip. But with Windows on ARM, one of the best things about it is that you have a much longer battery life. And so this whole announcement of this new NPU, the neural processing unit, along with Qualcomm's announcement, and this Copilot for PCs with this integrated AI capabilities, has me pretty excited for the future of Windows computing.
Monday was an inflection point in the history of Windows. It will go down along the other major events in the history of Windows, like the introduction of Windows 95 and the modern graphical user interface, of which modern Windows still pretty much uses today with some improved fit and finish. It was a big deal, a really big deal. And it's interesting because when you talk about computing history, you don't have to go that far back. Again, talking about the introduction of Windows 95, there was a debate that raged in the computing community in the 90s about CISC versus RISC. CISC being complex instruction set computing versus reduced instruction set computing. And for the most part, Intel basically solved it with brute force. Yes, they used a complex instruction set in x86, but they iterated on their roadmap so effectively and so efficiently over time that essentially, for the longest time, they brute forced their way out of the problem. And even though RISC was theoretically better, its roadmap wasn't as strong because there wasn't that unified front of folks developing RISC chips. You had a couple of efforts, but they never gained mass market appeal. So essentially, RISC kind of died out for a while. But ARM is effectively a RISC chip. So if you remember all this debate, it's RISC strikes back here is what has actually happened. It first came in smartphones, and we had all these ARM CPUs gain popularity, and then Apple brought their own custom Apple silicon that they'd been developing to the Mac, to Mac OS. And Apple has tons of experience doing platform migrations. They've done 3 of them now because they did the Intel or Motorola 68000 series and migrated that to PowerPC. Then they migrated PowerPC to Intel. Then they migrated Intel to ARM. So Apple's really good at that. The Windows ecosystem, it's tougher for sure because it's such a diverse ecosystem. There's so many different drivers and hardware combinations and different ways you can use your PCs. And to try to change that architecture is just frankly a lot harder. Andy's right. I've been using a Surface Pro 9 with a ARM chip in it for quite some time now. And they've been available for a while. There've been various ARM flavors available. And for a while, yes, there were compatibility issues because they could run Intel code, x86 code, but only 32-bit apps, which had really grown out of favor because all Intel CPUs and AMD CPUs that had shipped for the longest time were 64-bit. And 64-bit had performance improvements and memory addressing benefits and all of that. So there were literally apps that you couldn't run because they didn't have a 32-bit x86 version, and they sure as heck had not recompiled them for ARM. Well, when Windows 11 was introduced, it gained the ability to emulate 64-bit Intel apps as well. So for the most part, compatibility issues had gone away. Outside of esoteric apps or very specific bespoke drivers, most things just work on a modern Windows on ARM device. However, there were still the performance challenges. These were pretty much smartphone chips with a couple of tweaks and modifications to make them run. And when they ran ARM code, they run really well if you're running only ARM code. The problem is there's still a lot of Intel code out there, and that just is hard to emulate very efficiently. So what Qualcomm did is they went and acquired this company called Nuvia a couple of years ago. And Nuvia was founded by a bunch of engineers that had developed all of Apple's custom silicon. And so they brought them in-house and basically said, your mission is to develop a performant PC class chip running on an ARM architecture. And they delivered. They delivered honestly better than anyone would have expected. That would have been reasonable. If they would have delivered in the ballpark of M2, M3 performance and in the ballpark of the battery life improvements that Apple is enjoying on their Apple Silicon Macs, people would have been thrilled. But that's not what they did. They have beat Apple in multi-threaded performance on M3. They deliver better battery life than Apple in a lot of cases. They have more TOPS, which are tera operations per second, the measurement of the effectiveness of neural processing units. They have more TOPS than M3 does as well. they're incredible chips, just incredible. And this really enables a new class of software within Windows. And so these Copilot Plus PCs, they have killer battery life, they run cool, they have fans, but they're not noisy fans. They're very quiet, they don't spin a lot. And they enable new class of applications like Windows Recall, which monitors everything you do on your screen, and you can do a search for it in natural language. It'll take you back to that, like in any app, in anything you do. It's incredible. You'll have to watch the demo of it. It's far beyond my ability to explain, but this is a paradigm shift in Windows. And not every business will be able to move to this, because you'll have apps that only run on x86, or you'll have drivers that are only available in Intel formats, and you'll need Intel PCs for those. Okay. But I think for a lot of scenarios, you can move to these pretty effectively. And the software's ready. Windows on ARM is ready for its spotlight moment. It was the hardware that kind of held it back. And I think now that we have the hardware and we have the software, these are going to be incredible devices. I truly believe that, as someone who's been using it for a while now. And especially the other chicken and the egg thing is apps recompiled for ARM, because the thought process on developers has always been, why would I recompile for ARM? Nobody's using Windows on ARM. It's not worth my time. There's not ROI. Well, because these devices are so impressive, they are going to start to gain mass market appeal, which drives more apps to be recompiled for ARM. And we're seeing that today. Apps like Google Chrome have been recompiled for ARM now, that have kind of held out for a long time. And Microsoft's entire suite of apps across the board have been recompiled for years. Even the Office apps, which shocked me, because some of them have pretty legacy code bases. They've been around a long time. I mean, Excel literally dates back to the 80s. Excel runs native on ARM, has been recompiled for ARM, and runs great. It sings on ARM. So this is a really, really cool moment. As far as security professionals in particular, there's a couple of announcements around this that are specific to these Copilot Plus PCs. Number one, they'll all be Windows Secure Core PCs, which comes with a certain amount of security configuration and commitments that are enabled by default. Number two, they will all include the Microsoft Pluton security processor integrated into the Snapdragon X CPU. So that's awesome. And then there's like one other benefit. I believe it was with Windows Hello. There's like an enhanced security setting that's going to be turned on by default on all these Copilot Plus PCs as well. So they do deliver additional security promise above and beyond all of these other promises. And it really is creating a bifurcation of Windows in some ways, where you're going to have the class of PCs, the Copilot Plus, and then everybody else. And these are getting special software benefits. They're shipping with stronger security settings out of the box. So the story is just starting to be written, but I think it's one of the most exciting times in our industry in a very long time, bringing innovation and competition to a space that has kind of not gotten as much attention in recent years, as the smartphone's been the hot thing to innovate on. I think innovation's coming back to the Mac, back to the PC, and that's really exciting, because we still spend a lot of our day in front of these machines, and we want them to be innovative and interesting and exciting, and they are.
Absolutely. Okay, so the final thing that I wanted to touch on is our VP, David Weston, who is known on Twitter and other places as D-Wizzle. He wrote a blog about a lot of the new security features. He is our Vice President of Enterprise and Operating System, or OS security. And so he wrote a blog on the new Windows security stuff. And one of the things that I think threw some of the folks off in the Twitter sphere and the blog sphere and social media and whatnot was one thing that he put in there. So we went through the list of stuff that is brand new, and we touched on it very quickly, but in his blog, he wrote NTLM Manager, NTLM deprecation. So deprecating NTLM has been a huge ask for our security community, as it will strengthen user authentication, and deprecation is planned in the second half of 2024, which is not that far away. So for folks who are new to security or haven't been around, NTLM has been around for a very, very long time. It was replaced by Kerberos for authentication in Active Directory. And there were several vulnerabilities that were known to NTLM related to password hashing and salting. So in NTLM, passwords that are stored on the server and domain controller are not salted, which means they're not there's not a random string of characters that's added to the hashed password to further protect it from cracking techniques. So when adversaries possess the password hash, they do not need the underlying password to authenticate a session. So systems were vulnerable to brute force attacks. Attackers attempts to crack a password through multiple logins, and if a user selects a weak or common password, they are especially susceptible to the attack. And the cryptography for NTLM fails to take advantage of some of the new advances in the algorithms and encryption that have significantly enhanced capabilities over the years. And so, needless to say, NTLM is really not secure, which is why it has been a huge ask from the security community. But I think it is still used. And so when this was put into this blog that it was planned for deprecation in the second half of 2024, which we are fast approaching, there was a little bit of outcry. So, just wanted to highlight that particular piece. Adam, you probably have some thoughts on this as well.
There was an earlier post on NTLM deprecation in October of 2023. We'll link it in the show notes. And in that post, it walks through a little bit more than the single bullet point we got from Mr. Weston in here. And so if you want to understand a little more of what's going on, you should go check that out. So one of the things it talks about in there is that there were scenarios in which Kerberos didn't support scenario A or scenario B, and failback to NTLM was necessary. One of the things Microsoft has been working on is providing a Kerberos method to eliminate that failback eventually. So that Kerberos could do it all. And you would eliminate these scenarios where NTLM was needed because there was no other option. That Andy mentioned when he read through the book of news and he was talking through some of the different items, he mentioned this update is generally available. What that's talking about is these enhanced Kerberos methods that eliminate the need for the NTLM fallback. So we said in that NTLM deprecation post, we're going to monitor usage of NTLM. And when it falls below a certain threshold, that's when we'll start thinking about disabling it by default. I am not going to put words in anybody else's mouth, but I believe that's what we're talking about here, is that with these Kerberos rollouts now available and those scenarios now supported by Kerberos, we're seeing less NTLM usage in telemetry and feel comfortable that it's okay time to disable it by default. That doesn't mean you can't re-enable it if you need it in your environment. That's still supported. And most likely, and without knowing the implementation details, it's not like you're going to install 24H2 and it's going to flip it off. I imagine the way it'll work, and I don't know, so don't quote me on this, is that it will be for like net new installs of 24H2. That's how you'll see it implemented. And by the way, I'm getting ahead of myself because that hasn't even been communicated clearly if this is shipping in 24H2, Windows 11 24H2. That's my assumption. We still need more detail here. So I would say for the most part, don't jump off the cliff. More communication will come on this because we've definitely heard the customer feedback. Ultimately, I believe this is a disable by default in Windows 11 24H2 and probably only for clean installs. I would imagine that if you already have an install and you're doing an upgrade in place, the setting will stay unchanged. Even if we are starting to flip them to disabled by default, admins can roll that back if they need to. That has been communicated clearly as it will continue to be supported if you need it. It's just, why have it out there if it's not needed? It's just security risk at this point, especially when those scenarios where it was previously needed are now supported by a stronger and more effective authentication technique in Kerberos. So there's probably more to come here, but ultimately it's a good story for our listeners. We want this stuff turned off. We want it to go away. We want old versions of TLS to go away too. Am I right? So these are all positive changes in the long run, but getting there is always a little bit of a windy road. But I think good things are ahead.
All right. So really good show today. We're going to have all the links to the articles and the book of news in our show notes. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes as well if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJBrewer. See you at our next episode.